Basketball has its sixth man, the unsung hero who comes off the bench to help his team to victory. Football has its 12th man, an unseen but powerful energy that urges the home team forward. Now, Christianity has its 13th apostle, a faithful witness to the love, mercy, and truth of Jesus Christ. How about you? Will you be the 13th apostle?
In the book of Galatians, St. Paul makes a groundbreaking statement. There is neither Jew nor Greek, slave nor free, male nor female, as we are all one in Christ Jesus. But the apostle's comment pertained to our equal dignity as children of God through salvation in Christ, and therefore to the kingdom of God. And even though Christ said that kingdom is at hand, it is not yet here in its fulfillment. So until that day, we still have two sexes and two genders, or do we? Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of the 13th Apostle, where we explore the good, beautiful, and true of the Catholic faith and the Catholic Church, and where we invite each one of you to be that 13th Apostle in your daily life. This is Tom Caffrey with my co-host, Dan Duddy. How you, Dan?
Hey, Tom. How are you, buddy?
All right, thanks.
Good.
Friends, especially those of you listening to us from Asia, Africa, and the Middle East, turn up the volume a bit and open your minds to explore with us some challenging ideas about sex and gender. Perhaps you'll understand why many living in the West value these ideas so much, have so much energy spent on them, want you to think about them, and ultimately want you to live those ideas, admittedly at some risk. Joining us to help in that endeavor is Dr. Abigail Favale, Dean of Humanities and Professor of English at George Fox University, and author of the new book, The Genesis of Gender, A Christian Theory. Welcome, Dr. Favale.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Looking forward to it. A lot going on in your book. Really interesting. As soon as I saw the word cosmos, and I just happened to open the book randomly to a page, and I said, okay, let's get down to it. So, if God created us out of nothing by use of language, but if He had graduated from Smith College or perhaps from George Fox University with a degree in gender studies, do you think we would have a different creation and Adam wouldn't have blamed Eve?
That's an interesting question. But it's actually in some ways it's a good comparison, because you're right. So in Genesis, we have God who creates us with language out of nothing. Like, God is the creator, and He creates through His word. And in some ways, I think what we're seeing right now is this kind of distorted attempt to be God and to do that same thing by creating new realities through language. So in our time, we have human beings who are trying to kind of create new realities about what it means to be a man, what it means to be a woman, primarily using language to do that, right? By defining words, redefining words, and trying to separate the words we use from biological realities and bodily realities. So it's a really interesting kind of mirroring that's happening, right? So human beings sort of playing God by trying to create through language. But of course, it doesn't work, because if the realities we're trying to create through language don't actually line up with the reality that God created, then we're out of harmony, we're out of tune with the created order of which we are a part.
So if St. Thomas, he viewed reality as something between material experience and God. So that material experience is defined as potency or the potential, while God is fully actualized. He's actor in the existing. A man has existence through potency, and because he can grow and accomplish, and through his God-given intellect, he can recognize the act if you're outside of the religious framework, and I know you talk about and write about being in that framework, is the difference between those who are inside that framework and outside, is that an unbridgeable gap in your opinion?
Well, I don't think so. So there's the framework that I write about in the book, and that framework is really based on postmodern anti-realism. But it's not the case that every non-religious perspective is anti-realist, right? So there are certainly people who aren't religious who very much take science seriously and, take matter seriously and see that there is some kind of givenness to the world that we have to reckon with, even if they don't see that as coming from a creator. So I do think that people who take reality seriously, even if they're not religious, can still, there's still something about recognizing the way things are. And even if you're coming from like an evolutionary perspective, thinking, okay, well, human beings have kind of been fine-tuned through the evolutionary process over 1 million years to be a certain way, and now we're kind of messing with that. So that would be, you could come from that perspective too, and some people are making that argument. So coming from a non-religious but purely kind of science-based perspective, but at least one that takes real reality seriously, like bodily reality,
Yeah, I think that it's the great concern I have, and as I read your book and listened to some of your parts of your presentations, I kept thinking, on one hand, Dr. Favale is making so much sense. On the other hand, every time I heard the word real or reality, I kept thinking, I kept thinking of that gap, and how will we bridge that if you're recognizing what you believe is that reality? And I think up until 30 years ago or 50 years ago, every human in existence recognized that reality. But there's a growing group that doesn't recognize that reality. Well, if you think there's a glass of water over there and that person doesn't think there's a glass of water, that's a problem if they're going through the desert, and reality will hit them. It's like reality stops. Reality is at the tip of my nose, and if you punch my nose, that's reality. It's almost like so many people who are not in your world, Dr. Favale, the university, the academy, it seems like they just can't say, I can get into this. I can grab this. The people, as I mentioned in the beginning, those who are not in the West and not in, and I don't mean this in a pejorative, not in the elite of the West, in Africa, in Asia, and the Middle East, that they're saying, what? Where are we going from here? And a lot of them reject. They don't want this imported from America into their countries or Western Europe. So that's a difficulty. It's not a difficulty in what you were writing. It was me having difficulty with that whenever you use real or reality and saying, okay, if you don't believe that's real, where do we go?
Right. Well, one thing I would say, I guess you're right in that this is a peculiarly, that's a hard word to say, Western phenomenon. Like, this is a Western phenomenon, right? So there is something about, and even within the West, you will find this primarily in very elite environments, like in the academy or in the corporate boardroom or in the human resources department, right? So This is a generalization, but I do think it's generally true that you're not seeing this kind of almost obsessive rumination about gender among working class people and globally, right? Because it is kind of a luxury to be able to not have just other stuff that you have to deal with, that's very pressing. And also, I think that there is something about the elite Westerners, because many of them are sort of part of the laptop class, right? And especially if they're younger, they're not really having children as much. And so there's a sense in which they live in a reality where sexual difference doesn't seem to be very real. It does seem like men and women are interchangeable. I mean, if you're just sitting in a cubicle doing email, yeah, well, then it doesn't really matter whether you're a man or a woman, right?
Yes.
But I think around the world in different cultures, that there are certain cultures where you're still just very much like the whole culture is built around the reality of procreation. And so I think one thing that's happening in the West is the separation of man and woman, so how we think of man and woman, from procreative potency, right? You were using those terms, potency and act. And we no longer think about man and woman in terms of procreative potential, because we've sort of severed that link because we've embraced contraception, and that's shifted our understanding of sex. That's also shifted our understanding of biological sex and what the whole purpose of sex is. And so now we think of men and women more as something ornamental, like kind of an aesthetic or like a costume or a style. And so if you can mimic that style, you can kind of just step into that style, then you've acquired what that identity is. So, and this kind of loops back to the question of reality that you were bringing up. Because even though these ideas of gender identity, this idea that gender is based on my subjective self-perception, so that idea is really based on philosophical anti-realism down underneath. It really is. But most people, like you said, aren't anti-realists. That's not how human beings are. Very few of us are. So what you have, I think, especially among young people, they are exposed to these ideas, and that disrupts their sense of what's real. But then they turn around and make very realist claims about who they are. So if you hear a young person say, I'm not a boy, I'm actually a girl, they're not saying gender isn't real, and so I can be anything I want. They're saying, no, I am really a girl, right? They're thinking that something is real. So there's this paradox where this anti-realism has paved the way for these new assertions about what's real, but they're very much detached from material reality, right? From our bodies and from procreation and from all these things that just tie us to the created order.
Go ahead, Dan. I've got about 50 other questions, but they'll hold.
Dr. Favale, Tom and I are two different people. Tom has his master's in theology, and I'm a long-time high school football coach until recently for 40 years. So we joke that I have my master's in dirt, and bringing boys to men. And too late in my career, I dedicated my football program to the virtues of Jesus Christ, and attaining that masculinity founded upon truth. I have to tell you, I'm very inspired by your fundamental truths, and you keep coming back to those fundamental truths. And it's just so relatable, and it just enlivens that real creature, a true creature that lives inside of all of us, to hear you say these things. But, we brought so much of these Christian virtues to the football field, once again founded upon Christ. And simply, we kept it real simple and fundamental. For example, boys take, men give, and just all the virtues of generosity and obviously forgiveness and perseverance and the things that exude from Christ himself. In the game of football, the rules don't change, Dr. Favale, but by that happening, the virtues that come from it don't change either. So it's unbending. It's an unyielding truth, and it's consistently drawn. And the world doesn't give us that, We're in kind of like a secluded locker room, right on the playing field for back in and back off. My question to you is, and once again, becoming excited about what you're saying, what is it that your work will do to enhance the masculinity, or that this whole drive that we men that are being stewards, taking responsibility for the young men in our keep? What will your work, or what does your work do to enhance masculinity, true masculinity in our boys today in this world?
Yeah, that's such a great question. So that's something I'm actually thinking about more now. I think in the book, The Genesis of Gender, I was focused a lot on the experience of women and girls. But, I'm a mom of four kids, only one girl, 3 boys. So I think a lot about how to raise boys and what it means to be a man. And something I've noticed in my research on gender is that I think a lot of young people are rebelling against the scripts our culture has given them about what it means to be a boy, what it means to be a girl, what it means to be a man. And I think that there's a certain part of our culture that has a very negative narrative about manhood that sees masculinity as something primarily toxic, as predatory. And so you can imagine a young man who's growing up, and if he's kind of immersed in that narrative, why would he want to become a man, right? Mm-hmm. And he sees, then he hits puberty, and he sees his body beginning to turn into the body of this like predatory male. And then all of a sudden it's like, oh, well, it seems like it's better to be a girl than to be a boy, and I'm not just making this up too. I've heard this from at least 2, maybe more detransitioners. So these would be young men who identified as women for a while and then identified back as men. And they've talked about in their kind of own stories about how they didn't have a positive vision of masculinity. And so I actually think this is crucial. I think both our young men and our young women, we need much more positive visions of what manhood and womanhood look like that aren't caught in this simplistic story of women as victims and men as predators. So I think what you're talking about with generosity, thinking of that as a prime masculine virtue, I find that really compelling because that also connects to the fatherhood of God, right? Because the fatherhood of God is father because he's generative, right? Because he generates existence for all of us, right? So there's this generosity that I think is at the heart of masculinity. So yeah, I would love to begin to write more about that. I mean, at first I was like, well, I'm a woman. What do I know? But now I'm like, I don't know. There's something here, and I would like to explore that more.
Hey, Tom, one more question for now, please. Dr. Favale, you provoked a question in my head. If Jesus Christ were to physically descend today in 2022 here, put on a baseball cap, jeans, and a pair of sneakers, but he's Christ. And Christ himself, and he does Christ. He does himself, walking and doing his things. Do you think that this world or this nation would consider him, with all those virtues, to be toxic?
Oh, geez, that's a great question. I mean,
I kind of blindsided you, I think. But
I don't know. I don't know what our culture would do with Jesus. I mean, I think Christ gives us such a beautiful vision of masculinity that I would hope that our culture would be able to see that, because I think people are hungry for it, right? I really do think that people are hungry for it.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so that's an interesting thought experiment.
Well, I'm going to latch on to what my brother said there and what you said, Dr. Favale, about having the 3 sons. And in the context of becoming virtuous men. So it makes me think, I think you even said, what do I know? What do I know about, being a male, being a boy or whatnot? So on that word about, and I've talked about this, trying to use it as analogy, and it's when they introduced, for example, we'll stay in Dan's language, his wheelhouse of football, when they introduced women as color commentators on the sideline. And I remember thinking, there's a difference. This is not just for them, but it was just for some reason it was such a contrast the first time I had seen it, that a woman can know about football. She can read about it. She can listen to football players, coaches, whatnot, people, but she can't know it because she's not done it. And I think that's part of the problem with raising children and the terror of divorce or bad parenting, if there is no divorce, where a mother can absolutely, you're going to be able to, you're already doing it, I'm sure, I have no doubt, teaching your sons virtue, how to live virtuous lives. But my difficulty, and again, it's in the context of divorce, is a son can't identify with a mother. He can identify with things that some things that the mother does, but that's the challenge, especially for boys, because men will most likely not be a part of the family or not be nearly as involved after divorce as they were before the divorce. And so the boys lose that identity relationship. Okay, that's what a man does. We both look the same, and so and on. where a father ushers a son, accompanies that son through his journey into manhood. That's part of the what I wrestle with, what's happening in our culture. And of course, divorce has been, once no-fault divorce came in, Katie barred the door. And I see that as we're having more and more manifestations of that, especially with men, with males, especially in the black, I don't like the term community, but as if there's a monolith, but of any group. But where I see, okay, how are they going to learn? So, how intentional can you be to say, okay, well, I can teach my son's virtue, and I can teach them about a man, but their father is going to show them what a man is. And do you see that in all this confusion that you probably see a lot of on the college campuses? Do you see that is beginning to blow up, if something can blow up gradually in the culture?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think that it's really well established, in the social sciences that kids fare better when they have a relationship with both their mother and their father. And there is something, we learn how to be men and women, not primarily by things that are being taught to us but by how we see masculinity and femininity embodied in the world and in our homes, right? So much of the problem, I think, with our culture is that we've abstracted masculinity and femininity away from the body. But
yes.
That's what grounds it, right? And so, yes, I can talk to my son about masculinity, but I can't show him masculinity because I'm not that kind of body, right? I can't live and move and be that for him in the world, right? And there's something so valuable about that lived out expression of masculinity that's healthy and that's loving and that's strong, but also gentle, and generous. And seeing that is so important, probably far more important than talking about it could ever be.
Yeah. Go ahead, Dan.
Yeah, I would completely agree with that. I've always, with my football players and beyond, we try to even separate them from their own bodies and know that they're a soul. We don't have a soul, we are a soul. We have a body. But it's when we're taking those bodies, then we're putting our soul to work in masculine ways. I think I have 5 sons. I'm blessed to have 5 and 3 girls, Dr. Favale. I lost a boy at age 19. So there's a great deal of messages that come from that as well. But the boys are constantly watching you physically move your soul. Mm-hmm. So, and that's hugely important. And it's irreplaceable. I have so many of my football players in the past, more than I know, have taken me on as a second father. Once again, more than I know, because they watched me, and that's a huge point you make. And I know we only have a little bit of time left, Tom. What do you have?
A few minutes.
We got a couple minutes. I just want to ask this question. I can't help but ask it, Dr. Favale. In your conversion, what role, if any, did the Blessed Mother play in your work with regards to femininity in your conversion? Can you shed light on that at all?
Yeah, it's hard to describe in a way because I think Mary has been so important to me in my faith. And even early on in my conversion, when I was a baby Catholic, I was still, I grew up Protestant. And so even though I was I had this draw toward Mary, I was also a little bit worried and kind of scrupulous about it. Like, oh, well, how do I pray to her in an okay way? Or do I need to balance how much attention I'm giving her with Jesus? It's nice to be further down the road and not have that scrupulosity about it anymore, but just to feel free to love Mary and not worry about it.
Amen. I love it. Yeah.
Yeah, but I feel like I'm learning constantly from her. Like my own personal spirituality is very Marian. I've done the Marian consecration, and so that's kind of what I keep coming back to as really kind of entrusting myself and my work to her hands and trusting in her, kind of surrendering to her wisdom. And
Excellent.
yeah, so I feel like I'm learning more and more about my own womanhood from her all the time.
My wife says the same. Thanks for picking up that question for us. Thanks, Dr. Favale.
So,
yeah, of course.
Beautiful, beautiful answer.
Did you recognize the opening hymn by any chance, Dr. Favale?
I couldn't hear it well enough but what was it?
Well, it's from, I think, perhaps your patron saint, Hildegard von Bingen.
Oh, Hildegard! Yes, she is my confirmation saint. Yes, wonderful. Which one was it?
Voices of Angels, Voices of Ascension.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
just for
Beautiful.
you. Well, not totally
Thank
for you,
you.
a little bit for us.
Yes.
If it's for you, it's for us.
Dr. Abigail Favale, ladies and gentlemen, I think we moved the needle over in the right direction. So I want to thank you, Dr. Favale, very much for this conversation.
Yeah.
Really enjoyed it.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
And I want to thank Kevin Wandra of Carmel Communications, Ignatius Press, for helping us to arrange this. Thank you again. God bless all. God bless you, Abigail.
All right. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Bye.
Ladies and gentlemen, the genesis of gender. Heavy stuff. We don't shy away from that, do we, Dan?
No.
No, not at all.
Well, so wonderful.
So what's coming up next, buddy?
Stay tuned, folks, for the Angelus and your prayers, your prayer intentions with Peter and Jemmy.
Yeah, right. And WQPHradio.org. Always thankful to be a part of that great group, great team, loving people, faithful people. And we can only do this with your help, ladies and gentlemen. Help us out. God bless all.
God bless you all.
Thank you for listening to the 13th Apostle with Dan Duddy and Tom Caffrey. For more information on Dan, visit his website at www.danduddy.com or email dcduddy@gmail.com. Tom's website is faithpilgrims.com or email trcaffrey@faithpilgrims.com. How about you? Will you be the 13th Apostle?